Hi everybody and welcome to the latest in the series of ISE webinars. My name's Steve Isherwood, I'm Chief Executive of the ISE. Today we're going to be talking about virtual inductions. Many of those of you that are members of the ISE in our employer town halls and other conversations have been starting to talk about this as a subject, because obviously with the autumn looming ever closer, it's becoming more and more of a pressing issue as you decide what to do with your intakes. I'm joined today by, I've got a great panel. You'll be hearing shortly from Tristram, who's our Chief Research Officer. I've got Karen with her top tips from Smarty Train, doing a lot of work on virtual inductions, and also from two employers, Naz from Sky and Laura from HSBC. If you haven't logged on to one of our webinars, just a little bit of a background in terms of how it works. The webinar is due to last for an hour. As we have a large number of attendees on our webinars, we don't give you voice access, but you can ask questions. And I really would encourage you to ask questions of our panel. They're primed to answer your questions as they come through. So if you can use the dialogue box on the platform, that would be great. I will then relay those questions back to the panelists at the various parts of the session. Depending on how the questions come through, if I can get them into the conversations as we're going along, I'll drop them in then. If not, we will save time at the end and we will do all the questions then. So we definitely will leave space at time at the end. A little request from me, I am trying to multitask here, so keep an eye on the questions as well as keeping the webinar on track. If you do have any questions, please try and keep them succinct, as it's not always easy to wade through massive text when I'm trying to get the questions. So yes, if you've got any questions, please ask lots of questions, but do keep them succinct. That would be great. Time for our panel just to introduce themselves first. So if I could go to Naz first from Sky. Naz, would you just like to introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hi everyone. Sorry I couldn't get my camera to work today. My name is Naz. I work for Sky, have done for a number of years. My background is in psychology and organisational psychology, and I specialise in learning and development. So I've worked across leadership, manager, and more recently early careers. My focus at the moment is transforming how young people learn and grow at Sky. I'm also a Scrum Master across HR. That's me.
Thanks, Naz. That's great. Karen, can I go to you next?
Absolutely. Thanks, Stephen. So I'm Karen. I'm the Chief Design Officer at the Smarty Train. I'm a social scientist by training. At the Smarty Train, design inductions through to learning experiences and training early talent up to executive, and especially passionate about inductions and early talent. And I write a lot about the human experience of learning and what sticks. That's me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Laura, can I go over to you?
Hi everyone, I'm Laura Anderson. I'm the Graduate and Intern Development Lead for HSBC UK. So I'm responsible for our retail and our commercial banking programmes for interns, industrial placements and graduates. My background has been from the business side. So I've been with HSBC for more than 15 years now, predominantly in the retail banking contact centres, and for the last 5 years more in the HR space and emerging talent. Looking forward to speaking to you all.
Fantastic, thank you. And last but not least, Tristram.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tristram Hooley. I'm Chief Research Officer at the ISE, which means I spend my time asking employers questions and writing down the answers. So I will be giving you some of those answers later.
Fantastic. Well, actually, that later is now, Tristram. So on the agenda, I'll hand over to you, Tristram. So if you'd like to kick us off.
Yeah, I will do. I will just quickly share my screen. Can people see that? Okay, that's just a little slideshow. Yeah, is that okay? Stephen, give us a clue.
Yes, we can. Sorry, I gave you a thumbs up. You might not be able to see. Yes, we
can
see
okay.
it. All good.
Okay, great. All right. So, yeah, as I say, I'm Tristram. I'm going to be just giving you a little bit of context for some of the discussion about virtual inductions, because it's become really quite a big deal here. So just to give you the overall labour market context, I'm sure this will come as no surprise to most of the people listening, but what we're seeing is some very big changes caused by the lockdown and by fears about an oncoming recession, that there will be a reduction in the size of the labour market for graduates, for non-graduates like apprentices and school leavers, and then for interns and placement students. So that's our kind of big picture. And I think when we then look in detail at how organizations are changing their business processes, we can start to see some pretty big changes. So this slide shows what's happened under lockdown, and if you look at the two to really focus on are the pink one, so the pink bars, which are pretty substantial for each of these areas. All of these areas are things that employers would normally do face to face, and during lockdown, if they answered pink, it was saying they cancelled it. If they answered blue, it was saying that they were shifting it online. And if they answer, if they've given a brown as an answer, then that means they don't do that activity. So what that tells you is that there's been a huge shift in practices during the lockdown, and what we're seeing is either people are cancelling stuff or they're moving it online, and we'll look at that in terms of the inductions in a second, because it's really that's really playing out that pattern. So I think the key date for lots and lots of employers is September, October, maybe a little bit earlier, or just towards the end of the summer, when people are starting to think about inducting. They're also starting to think about doing lots of other processes. Obviously, schools are hoping they'll be going back. Universities thinking about what kind of new normal they're going to be going back to. We're all wondering about things like travel arrangements and so on. But in the context of inducting new hires, there's some pretty big questions hanging over this. So when we ask employers what they're planning to do in the autumn, what we can see here is that an awful lot of employers don't know. So this is how we are asked, how many are you going to recruit next year? And you know, on average, people are saying, well, about the same, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. But actually, the most important thing here is the number of employers who are saying, we don't really know, we're still figuring it out. Now, that was back in April. Obviously, people are starting to figure it out a bit more. So back in April, what were they telling us? It was beginning of May as well. I did a bit more analysis, and this is actually what their plans are for the autumn. And what we can see is that there is a lot of sense that people are shifting their business processes online. So again, here where we've got the pink bars on these charts, what we can see is that is employers shifting their activities online. Where it's blue, it's kind of a bit of both, and where it's green, it's carrying on with the face-to-face. And now, we didn't ask specifically about inductions here, but what you can see is there's a massive shift in the pattern of what people are planning to do next year for all sorts of business processes, which is to shift stuff into online or remote forms. So when we then get to ask employers about induction and development activities, so what happens when you actually get staff to start, or when you try and get staff to start? Well, about a third of them were saying we're probably going to delay the start dates. So that's that, you know, I said there are sort of two main responses. One is to cancel it or delay things, and the other is to move it online. So about a third are saying, well, actually, we're going to delay our start dates. And then this little figure here that you can see tells us what's the most popular date. So most of them are just pushing back their induction, maybe by a month or two, but some thinking, well, actually, it's not going to work. We're going to push it right back, perhaps to next year, so January, February, and so on. So we've got quite a big shift that's happening there, but a much bigger shift is that over half of firms are saying we're going to induct new hires remotely, and 3/4 of firms are saying, well, we're going to do more of our learning and development online. So we've got this big shift. People are trying to figure out what they can do online. If they can, they're moving stuff online, and if they can't, they're delaying the dates for their starts. So since that survey, we've spent quite a lot of time in conversations with employers. We hold weekly town halls with different sectors. We listen to what the employers are saying, and basically what they've been saying really emphasizes what we've heard in that survey. So most firms are not anticipating that face-to-face induction will be possible this year at the normal time, so in August, September. Some are then therefore delaying their inductions and looking at pushing those inductions back to a point at which they can deliver them as they used to do And that's probably also playing into a number of factors that are around the sort of worries about the way the labour market's developing. So, maybe you're not sure how many people to recruit. Maybe let's delay our hires. It will save us a bit of money. We'll push it back. And it'll also help us to solve the immediate problem of how do we induct these people. But as we heard, an awful lot are preparing for virtual onboarding, virtual induction techniques. And in fact, some have already started this because we've got the beginning of summer internships. Some have moved their summer internships online. So virtual inductions have already started. Other firms start to induct students into their firms right from now, really. So we're starting to see some already inducting people. And those virtual inductions can take quite a variety of different forms, but will typically involve sending out equipment, running sessions online. And generally what people are doing at the moment is using a lot of existing tools to deliver the virtual induction. So we're talking about things like Teams and Zoom and all these tools that we've now got to grips with. There's all sorts of issues coming out of it, issues around, where do you expect people to live? Is it okay if international students are still abroad? All these kinds of issues are coming up, as well as issues about the sort of things like cyberbullying and online harassment. How do you deal with these new kinds of HR issues that are emerging? So lots of issues emerging alongside this process of virtual onboarding. But for the moment, most people are using existing tools to deliver it. But we're also starting to see some suppliers offering packages. So maybe you're a firm that's not sure how to do this, and someone's going to come in and say, well, we've got a virtual learning environment. Perhaps you can buy into that. We'll run and structure the induction for you. But lots and lots of questions in our town halls. People are going backwards and forwards. They're talking about, how do you run group work activities online? How do you get through lots of information that you might have presented in a classroom? What are the different ways you might do it? And broadly at one end of the spectrum, you've got people saying, well, we'll just do exactly as we would have done, but we'll put it all on Zoom rather than be in a face-to-face environment. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got people saying, we're going to rethink this completely and restart from scratch. And so there's lots of really interesting questions that I hope we're going to get into today. So I'm going to finish there. Hopefully that just gives you a bit of context. I'm very happy to pick up any questions as we go along. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of context about what some of the data and some of the conversations that we've been having with ISE members have looked like over the last couple of months.
That's great. Thanks, Tristram. So are you sort of seeing the situation as being quite fluid at the moment in terms of, because there's so many uncertainties, just quite exactly how businesses will go back, what the autumn will look like? Is there still a lot of uncertainty out there?
I think there's a lot of uncertainty over numbers, but I think those firms that have decided that they're going to induct and onboard staff virtually have probably made that decision by now, and they're now figuring out the details of how it's going to work. And that's these things where on our town hall meetings, when we're hearing from employers, there's these back and forth with people coming up with different ideas, sometimes suggesting suppliers who might help them, but talking about things like can we do a bit of a blend? Can we perhaps bring people together in small groups in local areas? Also, these kind of practical questions about, for example, if we're London based, do we expect people to have moved to London even if they're still under lockdown? And these things have got some quite big implications for what and how you can run things. But my sense is generally the sort of biggest pattern at the moment is people are transferring what they did in the past online, using existing tools rather than going through a really radical rethink or buying tools at the moment. But I suspect that will change if this situation does continue for longer. Then I suspect that will change.
And I've had a question through actually already from Brian. Although the market is falling, quite obviously, there are still employers actually out there still recruiting, aren't there, Tristram? And they're kind of using virtual tools, etc. There are people still hiring people that will be starting later this year.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing is we're predicting that there will be in our part of the labour market there'll be about a fall of about a quarter this year from what was originally planned. So that still means that 75% of the jobs that people were planning to hire to at the beginning of the year will be going ahead. Now, there are going to be issues certainly going to be issues with graduate and youth unemployment, but that doesn't mean that nobody will have a job. So absolutely, there are still jobs out there for people, and employers are finding new ways to manage recruitment processes virtually and so on. And they're also, as I've just sort of suggested, finding new ways to actually start staff, even if they can't bring them into the office. And so, that is sending out equipment to them, running these inductions online and so on. So, work is going ahead. It's not all over. That doesn't mean there aren't some problems in the labour market, of course.
Cool. Thank you, Tristram. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those themes a bit later. Sorry if you can hear a bit of background interference. I think my neighbour's just having a skip delivered at the moment, so I'm not sure if that's coming through from your end. It's definitely coming through in my ear. Let's move on to, so what we thought we'd do next is just get a couple of insights from our two employer panel members before I go over to Karenisa to give us a bit more detail on some of the work that they're doing at the moment and the real background into how you do this properly. So Naz, could I just turn to you first of all and just kind of ask you just sort of what challenges are you facing regarding onboarding and inductions this year?
Yeah, sure. I think it's important to outline initially. So our plans is to do it completely virtually, and to your point, we've kind of battled between what might be best. Like, do we kind of bring them in locally to certain sessions, or do we go completely virtual? And it felt right to go completely virtual because it felt consistent, and we could be really clear about what young people should expect. So based on that, there's probably a couple of challenges that we now face. Firstly, it's if anyone has been to a Sky campus, it is absolutely phenomenal. And just walking through the doors, it captures the magic, the Sky brand, and we heavily rely on our young people coming through the doors and coming onto campus to capture that magic and feel connected to the brand. And since we can't do that, I think that our biggest challenge is to connect people with the brand and Sky virtually. It's going to be really difficult to do that virtually. So we're kind of missing out on that a bit. And our second kind of biggest challenge is to give people that human experience, to give them a sense of community, to help them feel connected to their cohort, to be able to feel really supported and build excitement with each other, and also feel supported by Sky, the early careers team, in terms of that sense. And finally, there's a bit of to your point earlier, there is a challenge. There's a practical challenge of technology, and how do we physically get people online? How do we send them the right tech, and what impact does that have on our merchandise, and how do we physically do that, and how do we get people online with all the right access, all the various different portals that we have? So there's a lot of practical things that we are still working through, actually. And I guess it's also about how do we keep people really engaged and land content in a really impactful way virtually. So it is a whole new world.
Yes, and you're not the first person I've heard who said that actually this is very much a fluid process. It's yes, there are plans forming, but there's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of what people will be doing this autumn. Which is why actually we appreciate both yourself and Laura coming on this call, recognising that actually this is still very much a work in progress. So it's great to hear your sort of be able to hear your ideas and what you're thinking about at the moment. Laura, what's the situation over at HSBC? Is it similar?
Yes, fairly similar. I think definitely on the tech side of things, I'm not looking forward to trying to deploy that to 200 of our incoming new team members. I think for us, the biggest challenge is how do we turn our existing programs into virtual and not try and make it sort of as a second best option. We're sort of taking it as an opportunity to sort of start from the beginning and actually look at what's going to be best in terms of virtual deployment of our inductions. I suppose to give everyone a bit of perspective in terms of what we've done, our interns and grads are all being delayed starting by between 6 and 8 weeks, depending on the programme. And I think initially that was to give us some time to well, I think back when COVID first started, thinking that it wasn't going to last as long as it had and have as big an impact. So we kind of thought that give ourselves a bit of time, it'll all be fine and we can run things as we normally would. But I said, quickly realising that that's not actually going to come about, and that we have to take this opportunity as something that's exciting and try and make it as fun as it possibly can be. I don't know if in terms of audience members, you might have heard me talk about before that a lot of our programmes are grad run and designed. So our internship, for example, we have a working group of 25 graduates who work with members of my team in emerging talent to deliver the whole programme essentially. So it's been a unique opportunity, I think, for them. And one of the things that we've been particularly focused in is our pre-boarding. So because we've got this longer keep warm period, it's about making people feel as excited about starting as they possibly can, take away as many of the nerves, because I think one of the things that's the biggest thing on their mind is how do they still get a great internship or graduate experience when they are joining remotely. So that's one of the things that we're really focusing on.
Is the regional aspect also an issue for you, Laura?
Yeah, I was trying to forget about that part, Stephen.
Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. I think generally there's the onboarding challenge, because normally we would be checking documents and things face to face. So our recruitment team has had to look at alternative ways of doing that. So we've got those workarounds and we're doing that by video and that great thing. We do have some challenges with visas, and a lot of our candidates do come from overseas. So it's looking at, well, how can they join? So are they going to move to the UK? Can they move? If they can't, what are the visa restrictions in terms of what they can and can't do? And with our internship, that's going to be fully virtual. So the whole internship itself. So we've got candidates that are going to be in Singapore, for example, and how do they work with us and not be working at all hours of the night? So yeah, some good challenges coming our way on that side of things.
Fantastic. Well, Laura and Naz, thank you very much for sort of setting the scene and giving us an idea of where your thoughts are at the moment. Karenisa, can I turn over to you now, because you're going to give us your 5 top tips, aren't you, for doing this for delivering a wonderful virtual internship experience?
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephen. So what I'm going to do is in the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to do a very rapid whistle-stop tour of some of what we're seeing emerging, designing virtually, and actually even physically for inductions. It's going to be quite quick, so I won't go into much depth, but we have produced a paper on this that does go into the additional details. So if you want to see that, please get in touch, or the ISE will be sending a link out following the webinar as well. So buckle up. It's going to be a bit of a ride. We'll begin with the first tip, which is why inductions matter at all. And ultimately, it's because moments make us. To give a bit of perspective here is a question, what do these have in common? So driver's license, baby shower, and an induction. And the answer is that they're all rites of passage that really help anchor us during periods of transition, as it were. So thinking about a driver's license, it's a rite of passage into adulthood. I think we can all remember that awkward period where we felt we didn't quite fit at the kids' table, but we weren't full-fledged members of the adult table. And in that period, a driver's license can be a real marker of that transition and say, actually, I do belong. I have independence. I can drive a car and go where I want to. A baby shower similarly helps anchor us in this transition period from not being a parent to this very unknown, scary world of being a parent. Inductions, quite importantly, play this role for early talent because they help anchor them through this period of transition where they're not students anymore, but they might not see themselves as part of the workforce. It's a critical period for early talent because it's helping them figure out how to navigate between these two fixed identities of student and worker without being in either fully. And these transitions are what anthropologists call liminal periods. And ultimately, what do early talent look for in these liminal periods? And how does it mean, or what does it mean for how you run an induction? Importantly, for early talent, it's a period of transition, as I was saying, and the induction is what's going to guide them. Importantly, they're at their most open because they're not sure where they fit in, what they should be doing. They're looking for a sense of belonging. They're looking to align their purpose with the business's purpose. They're looking to build engagement and affinity with the company, and most importantly, get to know the business. And for the business, for each one of you, it's a very critical moment to be that guide, to be that anchor through the induction that you design. It's a bit like being the very cool older sibling or uncle and aunt who who lets the grad, as it were, take a drive in their car in the empty parking lot or shares their records with them. And quite importantly, it has a very pivotal impact on business because it increases retention and engagement. It gives you an opportunity to communicate key information to your graduates and to build loyalty and belonging that lasts a long time. People who have a good induction are likely to stay for 3 years in a business longer than those who do not have a positive induction experience. So the reframe here is, how can you design your induction to anchor early talent through liminality and see it as much more than I'm onboarding you. It's actually I'm introducing you into a brand new world and helping you figure out who you are in this world. That's the first tip. The second, timing is everything. And this goes to when, not necessarily when is your induction held, but when are you talking about what during this induction? Here, we can learn a lot from Pixar when it comes to virtual inductions. We can learn a lot from animated movies generally. So animated movies have to figure out their story end to end before they go into production and start filming, because it's too expensive to change it once they do start, unlike live action movies. So to give you a sense of this, Pixar produces about, for Ralph Wrecks the Internet, their movie, they made almost 300,000 storyboard drawings in order to figure out what the right story was. In an average feature-length Pixar film, a storyboard has about 4,000 storyboard drawings in it to really map out that end-to-end story. What's the result? Exceptional storytelling and narrative that hook a very wide audience and a wide range of needs within that audience. And we can all relate to getting quite touched by the opening montage to Up, for example, or feeling nostalgic in Toy Story. That's because stories are powerful and Pixar has nailed the formula. For inductions, and importantly for virtual inductions, we need to learn from animated movies because we can't go back and change things. In a physical induction, you can read your audience, you can tell when they aren't engaged, you can tell when you might need to pivot something. In a virtual induction, it's very difficult to do that because there's a lot more that's contingent, there's a lot more risk in doing it. So that means you need to do 3 things. You need to define, refine your story before you even start your induction, know what you want to communicate, why you want to communicate, what you want to say. You need to understand the rhythm of the induction and what you'll be doing. So that means keeping the flow in mind, keeping what emotions you want to generate when, keeping when you want to connect with people in mind, and making sure you focus in on that so you don't, as it were, lose your audience halfway through the movie. And finally, understand the science of stories. There's a lot of science about how it is to make it, how we can design an effective story that connects with people, and the payoff is major. Keep in mind that when an audience is listening to a story, everyone in that audience, their brain patterns sync up and match up. And to Naz's, challenge at Sky, that's a really good way of building community because you're sharing experience. So it's critical to do that. And importantly, a story well told really increases dopamine, oxytocin, endorphin levels in the brains. It gets us being much more focused, creative, feeling like we belong, feeling engaged, etc. So it's worth knowing how to create a lovely story. And most importantly, ask ourselves or ask yourselves, what's your story for a blockbuster induction? The third tip that we're seeing as quite critical is content is queen or king. So this is about what you communicate, but most importantly, in a virtual world, what you communicate and how it looks cannot be separated. They're intertwined. To explain why this is, a few numbers for you. In June 2019, so about a year ago, the average British adult spent 50 days a year online. A year later, as in today, it's going to be a lot more. Our entire lives really have moved online, from work, socializing, entertaining, connecting, leisure, etc. And what the science and studies are showing is that the more online stimulus we have, the more we have to discern what comes into our system and decide what we want to push out and engage with. And we use our natural heuristics, as it were, to do that. Critically, we're very visual as creatures or as beings. To give you an example, we will parse a lot of what we see based on how it looks. So attention spans online, the most recent research is finding, is about 8 seconds. It takes 8 seconds for us to decide, do we want to look at this or not? It takes us about 50 milliseconds to assess visual appeal. And according to a recent study by Adobe, almost half of people will stop engaging with virtual content if they don't like the way it looks. So that means it's important to get this right. And as we get more and more virtual content, we have to keep getting it right as those who are delivering that content, because the audience is going to pass very quick judgment. So there's 3 things you can do to make sure that your work, your induction, is providing a visual hook. First, make sure it's easy to remember, it connects with your audience. Second is make sure that you use things that allow you to hook your audience in through other mechanisms, like, for example, gamification, which can help people pay attention when they might otherwise drift. And third, and most importantly, make sure it looks good and you're investing in that good look. So the question here is, how can you relay content differently and unexpectedly? The fourth point, which is quite an obvious one, is to make tech work for you. And this comes to the how you present out. We've all heard, I'm sure, many of these things on the next slide during a virtual call that we've had in the last week, if not even this morning ahead of the webinar. And the questions are that what we see here can be very frustrating, but we kind of plow through it. When it comes to virtual inductions, however, the thing to remember is that if nothing goes wrong on the tech side, no one's going to notice. But if something goes wrong, it's going to stick out like an absolute sore thumb. And that means it's important to get the tech right and make it work for you. That means understanding your technology inside out, knowing, what the limits are, what compatibility issues might be, what the package and platform, etc. is. But second, and very importantly, is investing in the right tech. As an organization, you might have a sense of what tech you need to put out there, but it's critical to understand what your audience will be using on their end, what they might be familiar with, what additional tips, tricks, primers they might need to get familiar with. And last but not least, test. If I could have had one word on this slide, it would have been the word test from top to bottom and right to left, because it's absolutely critical to make sure that you are testing, and you cannot overinvest in testing to make sure that it lands where it needs to land. So the question to ask yourselves here is, do you know all the tech options available? Are you picking the right ones? And how do you go about this? There's a lot more in the paper about it, so please do reach out for that after this. The fifth tip, and this I think ties into what both Naza and Laura have talked about, which is creating that human connection. This is not only about the audience that's going to be receiving this, but also the facilitators and the business, and how a human connection can be created across all of these players altogether. A really nice place to start thinking about this is actually the 2012 Olympics, which are obviously a global event that brings the whole world together, even when they're not in the same place. There's a famous anthropologist, the grandfather of anthropology, Victor Turner, who was a massive Manchester United fan, and he coined the term communitas, going to Manchester United games, being in a stadium with thousands of people, seeing everybody wearing the same colors, cheering together, complaining, commiserating together, watching this ball being kicked around. And it creates such a sense of community, of communitas, of belonging, that it's something that outlives and outshines the event itself. And that's why sports fans are amongst the most sort of loyal fans they are. It's a lifelong thing. And we might think that actually we don't have our physical stadiums anymore because of COVID. However, the Olympics are a great place to go because that's where the world is brought together without being in the same place. So how can we create those Olympic moments where everybody is, watching the underdog nation making its play for the first gold medal? It's very powerful. In order to do that, there are three things to keep in mind to build that genuine connection, critically doing it virtually. The first is the facilitators are absolutely key. They are, to put it, I guess, not in the most elegant of ways, they're the ball at Old Trafford. And that's what everybody's going to be looking at when they're joining your induction, focusing on, and they're the ones, the linchpins, as it were, for creating that connection. So how can you make sure your facilitators are ready, they're trained up if they need to be, they have the experience, and they know how to humanize the business in a virtual setting, which can be much more challenging than a physical one. You can connect and build that connection virtually, thinking about how do you build that sense of the underdog nation going for the gold medal? What are those moments in your induction that are going to create that? And how can you design them in? And finally, using technology to help achieve that. There's a lot of functionalities you can get in tech today that enable this to happen and to build a sense of belonging, community, and create those Olympic moments, which leads us to the final question, which is how can you create your Olympic moments in your next virtual induction? This was very quick, very rapid, high-level overview. Please do reach out if you'd like to get more on the paper where there's a lot more detail. But meanwhile, I'll hand it back to Stephen. Thank you.
Karenita, that's great. Thank you very much. And in fact, you've answered one of the questions that we had already, actually, which was around just getting more access to this. There is a paper, isn't there? And we will send a link to that paper following on from this. So Helen's asked a question. We'll be able to give details of how to connect with you guys, so we can go into in this more detail. I mean, that was a great, very intense, packed tour about what a good induction looks like. I think the thing that stuck in my mind from what you said, Karenita, is that a good induction can add 3 years to how long somebody stays with the business. I mean, that's a fantastic ROI, isn't it? For shows the investment case for making sure this works.
Absolutely, and I think it's something that is in some ways the first tip we have that reframe about seeing it as a pivotal moment. You are the first point of entry for someone's career. when it comes to early talent, their entry into the labor market, into the world of work. And if it's a positive experience, it's one they'll never forget. And that builds a loyalty that's hard to break, as it were, which is why investing in this is critical. And there's so much value to come from it because they're more engaged. They're more likely to, put discretionary effort into their work. They're more likely to want to contribute to the company and feel a part of it so early on in their careers, which is a great place to also just help young folks kind of settle in and thrive.
Yeah. So just turning back to our employers on the webinar, Laura, can I just ask you a question? We've heard the case that induction is such a key activity. It's one of the things that you were talking about when we spoke to you earlier. I mean, how are you planning to try and deliver that quality experience in such a difficult environment that we're in at the moment?
I think that's a good question, and probably one of the biggest challenges that we're all facing just now. I think for us, we're approaching in a way that this isn't about it being a substitute for a face-to-face induction, but this is it. So the thing we have to remember is our new entrants that are joining us, they don't know any different. They've not had a face-to-face induction with us before. So whilst we might be comparing it to what we've been able to do in the past, for them, this is their first experience. So we're trying to think of it like that and really focus on having fun and creating that sort of wow factor when they join us. We know it won't be like face-to-face, but we're not designing it to be like that. And in a way, we're challenging ourselves to try and be better than that, because you never know, this might be the sort of new normal that we're doing in the future. But one of the things that we're really conscious of is that you can't run an induction where somebody's sitting at a desk in front of a computer on Zoom all day. That's just not going to work. So we're finding different ways to bring it to life. So using different sort of energizers and fun things throughout the day, building in activities where we're actively getting people to walk away from the desk. So there's a session that we do called Talk It Out. And that's where you go and walk and talk to somebody and sort of building activities in where they don't actually need to be in front of the computer to be doing them. All of our activities are built around 4 key principles, so it'll be aligned to one of these. So we have Be Prepared, which is all the practical stuff. So one of the things we're really conscious of is that when people first start with us, if they're in a remote environment, they're not in an office, it's trying to remember that there's things that we all learned when we first started in our jobs. So things like setting up your email signatures, or how do you set up a meeting on Zoom, and all those sorts of great stuff. They don't have somebody sitting beside them that they can just ask. So we're trying to find ways that we can give them that, tap into that knowledge and think about all the things that they're going to need to learn. So that's Be Prepared. We have Be Inspired, which is learning from others, and where our programs are quite graduate-led. It's sort of learning from current or alumni, interns or graduates or things through the induction. We have Be Developed, which is probably the most obvious one in terms of content. So things like development masterclasses around about presentation skills, feedback, those sorts of things. But probably for us, the most critical part is Be Supported, because one of the things that we're hearing quite a lot from people is that they're worried that they're not going to have the same opportunities when they're working from home and whatever those environments are that they're working from. So we're really conscious that some people might be working from bedrooms or in areas where they've got siblings around and things like that, and that might not be as conducive to learning and to making a great first impression. So we're doing quite a lot to help support them and using our existing graduates to do that as well.
On that point, have you got to worry about things like people's broadband connections at home? Because we've one of the themes that we've heard talk about over the last few weeks are things like digital poverty. Not everybody has good broadband. Some people are using mobile. Is that something you're having to factor in as well at a practical level?
Yeah, so we've got 2 different ways of doing technology. So we can either send laptops and things out to people, or we can get them to use their own devices. So interns are going to use their own devices, and our grads will get laptops because they're going to be here for us for the next sort of 2 years. So it makes sense to do it like that. So we've done a bit of a survey with our newbies that have, like, or certainly with our interns, to check, do you have the right operating systems and things like that? And one of the questions we have asked is about broadband and connectivity and actually understanding their environments at home. So if they've got any concerns about how they're going to be working, so do they have a desk and chair? Do they have a quiet environment? And if they've got any concerns, to raise that with us and have a bit of a chat. Also understanding who else is working from home, because we've noticed with our existing graduates, if you've got multiple people in the household working from home, as we've probably all experienced as well, that if multiple people are on Zoom calls at the same time, that can cause connectivity issues and things like that. So we're just trying to work with them to understand what their situations are and to make them aware of the situations that might cause them problems once they actually start, so that we can get ahead of the game.
And now, just turning to yourself, you mentioned a little bit earlier around, you've got great offices at Sky. There's the whole sort of media space that you're in, and I'm sure that creates a wow factor in itself. I mean, how are you thinking around delivering that, not only the impact piece, but also that real quality of induction?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's important to mention that there's a lot of other things to consider apart from the actual induction days. So there's a lot of other factors that plays into effect, which is their whole joining experience that needs to be key and memorable and smooth. And just to give a bit of context, so our early careers team have been through a transformation journey where we've gone live with a whole new assessment process, a whole new branding and marketing recruitment campaign this year. And so we've gone all out, and now we've got to kind of keep that promise and the quality of things through, which is very key. And we're just beginning to design a whole new development experience. So everything is completely new for us. And not only have we never delivered these kind of induction days before, we've had to really quickly pivot to a whole kind of COVID-19 world where everything is digital. So there's a lot we've had to consider, and I guess there's two layers where we've got a day where we've got to think about all the amazing creative Sky wow things that they need to experience, and all the skills that's important in order for them to be able to learn and contribute straight away into their roles. And there's a key kind of practical element as well, which is another date that we're focusing on to make sure that people are receiving everything that they need practically, which through research we know is really important for our young people to kind of calm their nerves, and so that they feel prepared and know where to go and what things to use and what platforms to use and who to go to for any support and any questions, and especially in a kind of virtual world where, to Rora's point, they can't really ask someone next to them. It's really important that they've got that point of contact. So we're doing a little bit more than we've actually done before in terms of induction days.
And just ask, I imagine that one of the things that most employers are keen to do is to get their leaders involved in induction, get senior managers involved, and obviously with everything that's going on with organisations at the moment, they've got a huge amount on their plate. Are you enabled to engage with your leadership at the moment? Is this something that they are still having? It's able to get them to have a bit of a focus on?
Yeah, we have been actually. It's been really key to get them involved, and it has been a very difficult time where they've got lots of different priorities, and so we've had to drive the conversations around early careers right from when this all started around kind of recruitment and the questions around what the numbers look like and how do we onboard them and what the whole programs look like. And I guess what helped us drive those conversations was telling real stories, and also kind of it's been an ongoing journey for us with the entire transformation. So we've already had a lot of engagement with our leadership teams, and they were also kind of really keen to keep our promises to young people and also carry through with those. So we've right from internships as well, so where we decided to do those digitally, where decisions could have easily been made around cancelling events and just not doing them, we actually opted quite differently and to be able to be quite creative and think outside the box and pivot really quickly to deliver these experiences.
Thanks, Naz. Laura, yourself, I mean, the HSBC is is a huge global business. Again, the same to you. I'd imagine that your leadership has a huge amount of issues they're dealing with at the moment. Have you been able to engage them in the importance of induction and still getting that right?
I hope so. Would be my positive response. We had, even pre-COVID, started to look at our managing engagement around about our programs, because one of the things that we've historically always done is a pre-placement briefing with managers, and that's where we go through some of the practical aspects of what it means to manage a IP, an intern or a grad. But one of the things that we want to do this year is invest a little bit more in our managers. So typically we'll always do training and things with our grads and our interns, and that's great, but the majority of the time they spend learning in the job. And if our managers are then critical to ensuring that that's such a great positive experience, so we do need to probably be spending more time and investment on them. So we're building in a new module that they're going to do called Leading Teams Remotely, and that's all focused around about the challenges that we face of onboarding team members in a remote environment, and how do you make sure that you stay connected with them, particularly at the early stages, and with our interns and grads that are coming straight out of university, perhaps for many of them, first time in the corporate world, how do they help that transition piece? So that's something that we're really focusing on, to make sure that when people join, they feel part of the HSBC culture and our family, and that they're really able to create those strong first impressions.
Karen-Lisa, just coming back to yourself, obviously there's quite a lot of risk at stake here with moving this stuff virtually. What do you think those key risks are that are facing employers in terms of getting this right?
I think it's stuff that both Naz and Laura have alluded to in their responses, and what Sky and HSBC are thinking about, as I'm sure many are, which is that, you know, the decision is you want to bring something that is high value for the business and for participants, and you want to make sure it doesn't feel like a second best option or a band-aid solution necessarily, but it does give you still the business outputs that you need and the engagement from attendees that you need. And I think the big risk there is in some ways making a decision that looks too short-term rather than long-term, because ultimately companies that, even the 2008 financial crisis, those companies that chose to kind of scale back on recruiting or inducting their early talent, it took them longer to recover. And even just generally for the talent they brought in, because then you have to make up that time later, and you kind of want to be on the uptick and surge when hopefully lockdown ends and things start returning to, or at least whatever happens starts happening, as it were, out of this kind of limbo stage we're in. So I think one big risk is the short-term thinking. Another risk, though it's quite mitigated, is that the experience you deliver is not one that speaks to what your organization stands for, and it's worth investing in making sure that those values and that experience is brought to life in the induction itself and in the onboarding experience and in the time early talent have. All that said, there's a lot to be done for just being honest and transparent about, this is our first time trying it, you're a beta group, we're going to figure it out together, because a lot of people are a lot more forgiving, because we all know that we're moving and pivoting quickly. So I think not speaking to, you know, your vulnerability in this space, or at least transparency, is a risk, because that way you're not having an open conversation about the reality of the situation, which can actually put you on the front foot with early joiners. So I'd say those are my 3 flags for the big risks, and one can be mitigated.
And just thinking about the future, I mean, because there is some speculation that sort of running at the moment, whether it's virtual recruitment, whether it's what campus marketing might look like. I mean, because we talked about the risks, we talked about the difficulties of doing this. Are there opportunities in actually in the situation presented? Might some of this stick for the future? Might this change the way we do things permanently?
Absolutely. I think there's a huge opportunity for it done right. And there's this well-known Henry Ford quote where he said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And I think what he did instead is that he invested in the infrastructure of like suburbs and highways so that people would buy cars because they need them. He didn't build faster horses. He built cars in a system where cars were necessary. And I think here there's an opportunity for employers and for many of us to think about what are the benefits that are coming out of this situation that could actually improve the experience, that could improve our investment on onboarding and on early talent experience when they join a company, and how can we start now seeding that infrastructure necessary to make sure that we have the foundation so that when this ends, it's not necessarily like a tail back fully to everything face-to-face, because it might not be necessary, but we'll use this time to reflect on what those longer-term opportunities really are, and we've kind of built the cars, as it were, as opposed to gone back to just having more horses in the game.
I was watching the documentary on, the film on Steve Jobs yesterday, and again, there's another example of somebody says,
yes, exactly right.
Yeah, very single-minded around what you do delivering that quality. Laura and Naz, if I go to you first. I mean, same question to you really. Despite all the difficulties this is presenting and all the stresses, do you see there are opportunities here that you may not have had otherwise? And do you see some of this sort of possibly sticking for the future?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was a good opportunity to give us a bit of a shake-up and not for us to rest on our laurels thinking that we were doing something great. And a chance, I think, to bring everyone together in a different sort of way, because we are a nationally mobile programme, so we're not just in one central location. So in a way, that's probably helped us. But we've always enjoyed sort of getting all of our people together in one space, particularly for induction, so that big bang kick-off at the start of their careers. But I think it's taking a step back and looking at what are we trying to achieve, and if we can achieve that in a different way that's maybe more inclusive for everyone, then that's a real positive. So we're really looking forward to it. I might be crazy, but yeah, definitely something to look forward to.
And what about yourself, Naz? Do you see those opportunities as well as the challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I can agree with that. I think we've moved really quickly into this digital world, and in the future, similar to us, our programs are nationally across the country. So if this worked really well and the impact is similar, we would be hopefully we could look at a world where we don't need to run everything face to face, but we can actually achieve the same impact digitally. But I also think what it means in terms of the benefit for younger people as a business is they are joining at a very different time, and I think it might actually accelerate the way that they learn and grow in this kind of fast changing time, so that when they are in the business, they are adding value quicker and learning to kind of adapt to the pace that we have at Sky.
Tristram, can I just bring you back in here? One of the questions that I've had on screen is talking about actually learnings from virtual recruitment to virtual induction. I know that you've looked at what employers have been doing around virtual recruitment. Can you think of any learnings that actually might transfer from what employers have discovered there that might apply to the induction piece?
I think the recruitment.
I can hear you now. It's all right.
Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. I think the recruitment piece is a little bit different, and I think in terms of that question about the future as well, it seems to me very likely that some of the changes that have happened this year and which will continue next year for recruitment will probably stick for good. So because there's not a lot of reason to think, well, actually it makes a lot of sense for every employer to spend their time running up and down the M1 to different universities and then bringing all students to assessment centres and so on. If people can make a success of the recruitment side of it, then I think a lot of those things will stick pretty permanently. I think with induction, there's kind of two purposes to induction. One is that you want people to learn a load of stuff about ranging from where are the toilets up to how does the business work. But the other thing you want to do is socialization as well. Now I would say neither of those things are best done in a kind of 2 or 3 day intensive, but neither are they best done if people never physically meet and never come together. So I think when we have an opportunity to bring people back together more, hopefully we will be shifting to much more of a blended kind of form of induction and onboarding, where we'll make the best of both some of the kind of old ways of doing things face to face and some of the current ways. I think firms definitely are learning from some of the recruitment stuff, particularly the way they're running assessment centres, where I think they're learning quite a lot about how you do online group work, how you set tasks online, how you manage interactions in groups and things. And a lot of those things will be very useful for the online inductions. But my guess is that the online recruitment is going to be more permanently shifting online, while this will probably move back into a more blended model.
Thanks, Tristram. And Karen as well, would you have a similar view? I mean, one of the things I'm wondering, so another question we've had is talking about stakeholders and costs and ROI. And of course, would it be fair to say that delivering this virtually could generate cost savings? Particularly, we're facing, some economic difficulties. You haven't got all the travel, etc., associated. So I'm wondering if stakeholders will look at this in a year's time and go, well, it worked. Maybe it didn't work, perfectly. We missed out some of the things that Tristram and Laura and Naz have just mentioned, but actually, do you know what? It saved 50% of the budget. Is that a kind of a difficult conversation you see coming down the line?
It could possibly be, but I think we also have to keep in mind we are all in an experimental stage, and as much as we know about how people learn how to build a stellar experience, there's so much more going on in what people are thinking about and worried about when it comes to starting their role or for businesses that could impact their decision making now and in future, or at least how they think of this experience. And to put it more concretely, yes, it does save travel costs, but at times the technology costs to think about as well are not as high, but could be high. And to Tristram's point, I think what Naz and Laura were saying as well, there is so much value in bringing people together. There's probably nothing that replicates actually going to a Man U game, for example, and seeing that cheering crowd versus doing it virtually. And the benefits of virtual might be that for a global organization, you can bring people together at a lower cost, but virtually, but bringing them together physically might have much greater returns. And I think it's a much more nuanced conversation that might need to happen. And it's something that at least we're keeping an eye on in terms of what is the longer term return on a virtual induction, where are we still seeing gaps in that experience? And most importantly, is it giving businesses what they need? Because it's not just about bringing talent into the business, it's making sure that they're set up to succeed, to help you, fill skills gaps, to make sure you meet your longer term business objectives with the skills that are necessary, you're building future leaders, etc. And it might be a next conversation, I think, once this happens or resolves itself a little bit and we're like, well, travel costs might be saved, but what our long-term investment, we need to think about that and how we make sure that we're bringing the right people together at the right time in the right ways. And it might just be that we innovate, because now is the time to innovate in how we do that as well.
Fantastic. I think that's a great note to end on. It. We've covered all the questions we had, and we're pretty much on the hour. It's just struck me that actually, for those of you that are watching this live, some of you will no doubt be watching this on the recording. But actually, today's the day we should have been in Brighton having our start of our summer conference. So, if this was the normal year, we'd be giving you a round of applause from the audience. So, unfortunately, we haven't been able to replicate that virtually. But we've had a good crowd tuning in, and lots of people everybody stuck with it. So, and had some great insights from you all. So thank you very much from me and everybody listening for a great and informative session, and the best of luck, Laura and Naz and Karen Lisa, with all that you're doing this autumn for those what I'm sure will be fantastic inductions. It'll be great to have you back once it's done and hear any learnings actually once it's all been implemented. So as I said at the start, this webinar is recorded. You will receive a link to the webinar, a link to the trade paper from Smarty Train. If you haven't done already, please do visit our previous recordings. We're doing roughly 2 webinars a week. We've also got podcasts out there. We talked about virtual recruitment. There's lots of stuff on that. We've touched on social mobility and diversity. We've got plenty of stuff on that and a whole range of other subjects. So please do engage with those and keep tuning in, and also share the links. What we've decided to do as part of this crisis is we haven't put any of this behind our paywall. So please feel free to share it widely, because we think it's important that everybody gets access to this knowledge and thinking at the moment. Enjoy the rest of the day, everybody, and hopefully I will see you all in person soon. So thank you again to all, and thank you to our panel.